The Hero's Sacrifice, Wang Yibo and Xiao Zhan. The world has always written stories of heroes. Those who rise when darkness threatens to swallow everything. Those who carry burdens too heavy for ordinary souls. And those who, in the end, become legends not by living forever, but by giving everything they had in the fleeting heartbeat of sacrifice. Among such stories, few hold the haunting beauty of the bond between Wang Yibo and Xiao Zhan. Their tale, whispered in fragments across history, was one born not in the ordinary glow of friendship, but in the fiery crucible of battle, where loyalty and love were tested against the weight of destiny. When Wang Yibo first crossed paths with Xiao Zhan, the two could not have been more different. Yibo was the quiet storm, reserved, sharp, his eyes carrying the burden of unspoken thoughts. Xiao Zhan, in contrast, was the steady flame, warm, compassionate, with a smile that could disarm even the most hardened warrior. They met as soldiers, thrown into the same regiment during one of the darkest chapters of our nation's history. War had carved scars into the land, leaving cities in ruins and families shattered. For many, survival was the only goal. But for Yibo and Xiao Zhan, survival was never enough. They fought not only to protect their homeland but also to protect each other. On countless nights, when the world seemed to be holding its breath between battles, they would sit by the flickering fire, their shoulders brushing, their words soft but deliberate. "Do you ever think about the future?" Xiao Zhan asked one night, his gaze fixed on the stars that struggled to pierce through the smoky skies. Yibo didn't answer immediately. He had a habit of pausing, as though weighing every word. Finally, he murmured, "If I think too far ahead, I forget how fragile today is." Xiao Zhan tilted his head, studying him. "So, you live in the moment." Yibo's lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind that carried both pain and peace. "No, I live for the people who matter in the moment." It was not an admission of love, not exactly, but it was the closest Yibo would come to confessing the depth of his devotion, not just to the cause, but to Xiao Zhan himself. The calm they clung to never lasted. Rumors of an impending battle spread like wildfire among the soldiers. An enemy force, larger than any they had faced before, was said to be marching closer. The whispers carried weight. This battle could decide the fate of everything they held dear. Preparations began. Weapons were sharpened, armor reinforced, and soldiers drilled until exhaustion blurred their vision. But amidst the chaos of preparation, Yibo and Xiao Zhan found moments of quiet, a stolen glance across the camp, a hand that lingered on a shoulder a second too long, a silence filled with unspoken promises. Still, beneath those fleeting moments, a current of dread lingered. Xiao Zhan, ever intuitive, sensed it in Yibo. His friend's eyes, once sharp with determination, now carried a flicker of something else, acceptance, as though he had already glimpsed his fate. One night, unable to restrain his concern, Xiao Zhan confronted him. "You've been distant," Xiao Zhan said softly, pulling Yibo aside where the others couldn't hear. "Tell me what you're thinking." Yibo's jaw tightened. "I'm thinking about what's coming." "Don't do that," Xiao Zhan pressed, his voice cracking. "Don't talk like tomorrow is already decided. We fight together. We live together." For a moment, Yibo almost let the truth slip, that he would gladly give his life if it meant Xiao Zhan could live. Instead, he simply placed a hand on Xiao Zhan's shoulder, steadying him. "As long as you're here, I'll be here too." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a vow, one that Xiao Zhan clung to in the nights that followed. The eve of battle arrived. The camp buzzed with unease. Soldiers cleaned their weapons in silence, some muttering prayers, others staring blankly into the darkness as though trying to memorize the world one last time. Yibo and Xiao Zhan sat apart from the others, near the edge of the camp where the wind carried whispers from the battlefield that awaited them. Xiao Zhan broke the silence. "If we don't make it out tomorrow." Yibo immediately cut him off. "Don't." "But." "I said don't." Yibo's tone was sharp, but beneath it lay desperation. He couldn't bear to hear Xiao Zhan speak of death, not when the very thought clawed at his own chest. Xiao Zhan sighed, frustration mixing with sorrow. "You think you can protect me from everything, don't you?" Yibo finally turned to him, his eyes glinting in the dim firelight. I don't think. I know. It was a statement of certainty, not arrogance. And in that certainty, Xiao Zhan saw the terrifying possibility that Yibo was ready to give everything, even if it meant losing himself. They fell into silence again, the weight of the moment pressing heavily between them. Finally, Yibo spoke, his voice softer now. If tomorrow is our last day, then let today mean something. Xiao Zhan didn't ask what he meant. Instead, he leaned closer, their foreheads almost touching, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. It was not a kiss, not yet, but it was enough, a fragile, trembling moment suspended in time, a memory that would linger long after the world fell into chaos. As dawn broke, the sky painted itself in crimson and gold, as though foreshadowing the blood that would soon be spilled. The soldiers lined up, their armor glinting under the weak light, their faces hardened with determination but shadowed by fear. Yibo tightened the straps of his armor with practiced precision, his movements efficient and calm. Xiao Zhan, standing beside him, felt his chest tighten. Promise me something, Xiao Zhan said suddenly. Yibo glanced at him. What? Promise me you'll come back, no matter what. Yibo's lips twitched into that faint, almost tragic smile. I'll do everything I can. It wasn't the promise Xiao Zhan wanted, but it was the only one Yibo could give. And deep down, Xiao Zhan feared it was already a goodbye. The battlefield stretched before them, an endless plain that seemed to swallow the horizon. The enemy waited in the distance, their numbers vast, the banners dark against the rising sun. The air was thick with tension. Every soldier knew that within minutes, the first arrow would fly, and everything would change. Yibo stood at the front line, his sword gleaming, his stance unwavering. Xiao Zhan stood just behind him, his heart pounding in his chest, his eyes fixed on Yibo's back. It struck him then, with painful clarity, that this back, this presence that had always been his shield, might one day vanish. And in that instant, Xiao Zhan whispered a prayer he had never spoken before. Let him live, even if I must fall. But fate, cruel and unyielding, had already written another ending. The sun had barely risen when the world erupted into war. The first arrow cut through the sky like a scream, slicing across the tense silence and embedding itself into the earth near the soldiers' feet. It was not just wood and iron. It was the signal, the spark, the confirmation that there was no turning back. And then, like thunder breaking, the battlefield roared to life. Wang Yibo was the first to move. His sword gleamed as he charged forward, a figure of steel and silence, every movement sharp and deliberate. Behind him, Xiao Zhan followed, his own weapon clutched tightly, his breath ragged with both fear and determination. The two had fought together countless times before, their rhythm in battle almost unnatural in its precision. Where Xiao Zhan faltered, Yibo filled the gap. Where Yibo pressed forward, Xiao Zhan covered his flank. They moved like two halves of a whole, their survival dependent not just on skill but on the bond that had been forged through blood and trust. But today was different. Today, the enemy was relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Waves upon waves of soldiers crashed against them like a tide determined to drown everything in its path. Xiao Zhan swung his blade, his arms trembling from the force of impact. Blood sprayed, smoke rose, and the world became a blur of red and gray. Through it all, his eyes sought one thing, Yibo. And Yibo never failed him. Every time an enemy blade came too close, Yibo was there, deflecting, blocking, striking with precision. He fought not with desperation, but with focus, as though every motion had been calculated long before the battle began. Still, there was something in his gaze, something Xiao Zhan couldn't ignore. It wasn't just determination. It was resolve, a finality. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. The clang of steel and the cries of the fallen blurred into a haunting chorus that echoed across the plain. The ground grew slick with blood, making every step treacherous. Smoke choked the air, the scent of fire and iron heavy enough to burn in the lungs. Through the chaos, Xiao Zhan fought with everything he had. His arms ached, his body screamed for rest, but he refused to falter. Every time his strength wavered, his mind replayed Yibo's words from the night before. As long as you're here, I'll be here too. But the battlefield was merciless. At one point, Xiao Zhan stumbled, his weapon slipping from his hand as an enemy soldier lunged at him. His heart froze, until Yibo appeared, his blade slicing through the attacker with terrifying speed. "Stay with me." Yibo's voice was sharp, urgent, almost breaking. Xiao Zhan nodded, gripping his weapon tighter, but inside he felt something twist. Yibo wasn't just fighting for victory, he was fighting for Xiao Zhan's life, with a desperation that went beyond duty. For a fleeting moment, the chaos shifted, and they found themselves back-to-back, surrounded but alive. "Are you hurt?" Yibo asked, his eyes scanning Xiao Zhan's form quickly. "Nothing I can't handle," Xiao Zhan replied, panting. "You?" Yibo gave a faint smirk, blood streaking across his cheek. "You know me. I don't break easily." It should have been reassuring, but Xiao Zhan knew Yibo too well. The smirk was forced, the words a shield. Beneath them lay exhaustion, and something else, something Xiao Zhan couldn't name but feared with every fiber of his being. They fought side by side again, the movements a dance of survival. Yet every time Xiao Zhan risked a glance, he saw Yibo edging closer and closer to the line between life and death, as though he were already prepared to cross it. The tide of battle shifted when the enemy commander entered the field, a towering figure clad in black armor, his presence casting a shadow across the plain. Soldiers scattered before him, his blade cutting through men as though they were paper. Fear rippled through the ranks. Even seasoned fighters hesitated, their courage faltering at the sight of him. But Yibo did not hesitate. The moment his eyes locked onto the commander, something inside him hardened. Xiao Zhan saw it. The subtle tightening of Yibo's jaw, the way his grip on his sword shifted, the stillness that came before the storm. "Don't," Xiao Zhan warned, sensing what Yibo intended. Yibo's gaze flickered to him for a moment, softer than the chaos around them. "Stay behind me." And before Xiao Zhan could stop him, Yibo charged. The clash between Yibo and the enemy commander was unlike anything Xiao Zhan had ever witnessed. The two figures collided with a force that shook the very air, steel meeting steel in a storm of sparks and fury. Yibo moved with a grace that belied the brutality of the fight. Every strike was precise, every step calculated. But the commander was a monster, stronger, heavier, relentless. Their duel became the center of the battlefield, soldiers pausing in their own fights to watch the titans clash. Xiao Zhan wanted to join, to stand by Yibo's side. But enemies pressed in around him, forcing him to fight, to watch helplessly as Yibo faced the impossible alone. The commander's blade came down in a vicious arc, and Yibo barely deflected it, the impact reverberating through his entire frame. His knees buckled, but he didn't fall. His eyes burned with something Xiao Zhan recognized all too well, unwavering resolve. He's not fighting for himself, Xiao Zhan realized, his chest tightening. He's fighting for me. At one point, the commander's strike broke through Yibo's guard, sending him crashing to the ground. The enemy raised his blade, ready to end it. "No!" Xiao Zhan screamed, breaking free from the soldiers holding him back. He lunged forward, but he was too far. At the last second, Yibo rolled, his blade slicing upward in a desperate counter. The strike caught the commander across the arm, forcing him back. Yibo staggered to his feet, his body trembling, blood dripping from a wound at his side. But even wounded, he stood tall, his eyes locking with Xiao Zhan's for the briefest moment. And in that look, Xiao Zhan saw it again. The silent promise, the unspoken vow. "I'll protect you, no matter what it costs." The battle raged on, but the duel had taken its toll. Yibo's movements grew heavier, his breaths shorter. Xiao Zhan finally broke through the circle of enemies and reached him, grabbing his arm. "You can't keep this up," Xiao Zhan pleaded, his voice breaking. "We have to fall back." Yibo shook his head, his expression unreadable. "If we fall back now, they'll break through. And if they break through, you won't make it." Xiao Zhan's grip tightened, desperation clawing at him. "Then we'll fight together. Don't you dare think about doing this alone." For a moment, Yibo almost gave in. Almost. But then his gaze shifted to the enemy commander, who was regrouping, his soldiers rallying behind him. Yibo knew what had to be done. As the enemy prepared for another wave, Yibo turned to Xiao Zhan. His expression softer now, almost gentle despite the chaos around them. "Zhanji," he said quietly, using the familiar address that carried years of meaning. Xiao Zhan froze, his heart pounding. Yibo rarely used it in battle. It was too intimate, too personal. "If something happens to me," Yibo continued, his voice steady, "don't waste it. Live." Xiao Zhan's eyes widened, tears threatening despite the smoke and blood around them. "Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare." But Yibo only gave him a faint smile, the kind of smile that carried tragedy within it. And in that moment, Xiao Zhan realized with horror what Yibo had already decided. The battlefield was chaos incarnate. Smoke curled like restless spirits across the plain. The cries of the wounded mingled with the clash of steel, and the very earth seemed to tremble beneath the weight of death. And in the heart of it all stood Wang Yibo, blooded, battered, but unyielding. Xiao Zhan was at his side, his breaths coming in sharp, ragged bursts. His body ached, but his heart ached more. He knew, with every second that passed, that something was unraveling inside Yibo. Not just his strength, but something deeper, something tied to fate itself. The enemy commander rose again, his black armor glinting through the smoke, his massive blade dragging furrows in the earth. He had suffered wounds from Yibo's earlier counterattack, but rage seemed to fuel him, making him more dangerous, more relentless. He pointed his blade directly at Xiao Zhan. "Take him!" The commander roared to his men, his voice cutting across the battlefield. "Bring me his head." Xiao Zhan stiffened, his grip tightening on his sword. He stepped forward instinctively, ready to defend himself. But Yibo moved faster. Yibo shifted, placing himself directly in front of Xiao Zhan, his shoulders squared, his stance defiant. He didn't even glance back, but his meaning was clear. "You will not touch him while I still stand." The enemy soldiers surged forward, and Yibo met them head-on. His blade moved like lightning, cutting down foes with precise, almost desperate strikes. Xiao Zhan fought too, but his eyes never left Yibo. He saw every stagger, every falter, every drop of blood that Yibo shed. And then, in one horrible moment, the commander's blade struck true. It sliced across Yibo's side, deep and brutal. Yibo staggered, his knees buckling, but he did not fall. He forced himself upright, his sword trembling in his grip. "Yibo!" Xiao Zhan screamed, his voice breaking. He lunged forward, cutting down two soldiers in a frenzy to reach him. But Yibo held up a hand, stopping him. His eyes, though dimmed by pain, still carried fire. "Stay back." It wasn't a plea, it was an order. With one last surge of strength, Yibo turned his focus back to the commander. His body was failing, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. Every strike, every block, every desperate move carried one purpose: to buy Xiao Zhan one more second of life. The commander laughed, a cruel, guttural sound. "You fight well, boy, but you're finished." Yibo's grip tightened on his sword. His voice, though hoarse, rang with clarity. "As long as I still breathe, he lives." The duel reached its climax. Yibo's sword clashed with the commander's in a final, thunderous impact. Sparks exploded, steel screamed, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Then the commander's blade found its mark. It pierced through Yibo's chest, the force lifting him from the ground. The world fell silent in Xiao Zhan's ears, everything drowned out by the sight before him. "No!" Xiao Zhan screamed tore from his throat, raw and broken. He rushed forward, cutting down anyone in his path, his eyes wide with horror. Yibo gasped, blood staining his lips, but somehow he smiled. Xiao Zhan caught him as he fell, cradling him against his chest, his own body shaking uncontrollably. "Stay with me," Xiao Zhan begged, his voice trembling. "Don't you dare leave me. Please, Yibo, please." Yibo's hand, trembling and blood-stained, reached up to touch Xiao Zhan's face. His eyes softened, the fire in them dimming but still filled with warmth. His lips parted, and in a whisper barely audible above the chaos, he spoke the words he had never dared to say aloud before. I love you. Xiao Zhan froze, his tears spilling freely now, his chest breaking with every heartbeat. No, no, not like this. Not now. You can't. But Yibo's smile only deepened, faint and fragile, his last gift. Live, for me. And then, with a final exhale, his hand slipped from Xiao Zhan's cheek, his body going limp in Xiao Zhan's arms. For a moment, the world ceased to exist. Xiao Zhan held him tightly, refusing to accept what had just happened. The battlefield, the soldiers, the screams, all of it faded into nothing compared to the stillness of the man in his arms. His heart shattered, piece by piece, with every second that passed. But grief quickly transformed into something else. Fury. Xiao Zhan rose, his body trembling, his eyes blazing with a fire fueled by loss. He picked up Yibo's sword, the blood still warm on its blade, and turned to face the commander. You took him from me. Xiao Zhan growled, his voice low and deadly. The commander sneered. He chose to die. Xiao Zhan's grip tightened on the sword. No, he chose to love. And with a scream that shook the heavens, Xiao Zhan charged. The duel that followed was not graceful. It was not calculated. It was raw, brutal, fueled entirely by grief and rage. Xiao Zhan fought with the strength of a man who had already lost everything. And in that fury, he became unstoppable. Blow after blow rained down on the commander, each one fueled by Yibo's sacrifice. The commander faltered, his arrogance crumbling under the sheer force of Xiao Zhan's rage. And finally, with one last, devastating strike, Xiao Zhan drove Yibo's sword through the commander's chest. The man who had taken Yibo's life fell, his body collapsing into the dirt. But victory brought no relief. Only silence. Only emptiness. When the battle finally ended, the field was littered with the fallen. The survivors gathered, their faces hollow, their spirits heavy. And in the center of it all knelt Xiao Zhan, Yibo's body still cradled in his arms. No words could capture the sight. The strongest among them had fallen, not because he sought glory, but because he chose love. He became a shield, a final wall against the darkness. And in doing so, he etched his name into eternity. That night, the camp was silent. No songs of victory were sung, no toasts were raised. Instead, the soldiers lit candles, each flame a tribute to the man who had given everything. Xiao Zhan sat apart, the weight of Yibo's final words echoing endlessly in his mind. I love you. The words that should have marked a beginning had become an ending. Yet in their tragedy, they also became immortal. In the years that followed, songs were written of Wang Yibo's sacrifice. Stories spread of the warrior who smiled in the face of death, who whispered love with his final breath. Xiao Zhan carried those words with him always. He fought on, lived on, not because the pain lessened, but because Yibo had asked him to. Every battle he survived, every dawn he witnessed, was a continuation of the life Yibo had given him. And though the world moved on, though time carried others far from that battlefield, Xiao Zhan never forgot. On quiet nights, beneath the same stars they once watched together, he would whisper into the wind, I'm still here, Yibo, because of you. And somewhere, in the silence of the night, he almost swore he could hear a voice answering back. A faint smile, a whispered truth. I love you too. Wang Yibo's story was not one of defeat, but of love. His sacrifice was not the end, but the proof that even in the darkest of times, love could burn brighter than death itself. He became more than a warrior. He became a legend, a memory eternal. And in Xiao Zhan's heart, he remained not just a hero, but the love he had waited a lifetime to confess. Thanks for watching.